Hello and welcome to this video. We were continuing the second chapter of your history, that is Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. In this video, we will discuss about the Russian Revolution. The October Revolution of 1917, the fall of monarchy in February 1917, and the events of October are normally called the Russian Revolution. So, Russian Revolution is not any particular incident. It is a set of various moments during different times together called as Russian Revolution. For example, as when we talk about the freedom struggle of India or the independent struggle of India, it is not about any particular moment like whether it's Chori Chora moment or the non-cooperation moment or the salt march. When we talk about the freedom struggle of India, it is the combination of all those small events that contributed to the success of freedom struggle of India. Like that, the Russian Revolution is not any specific moment or revolution. It is all those series of revolutions that occurred in Russia which together called as the Russian Revolution. Now, before discussing more about the Russian Revolution, it is very much essential to understand the society of Russia. What kind of sociality what kind of society was Russia during the happening of Russian Revolution, and what social situation forced the people to revolt? So, beginning with understanding the society of Russia, let's first discuss about the Empire of Russia. The Russian Empire in 1914. In 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ruled Russia. Like in other countries, the ruler called king, in Russia, the ruler were called Tsar. So in 1914, the Tsar of Russia was Nicholas II. The majority religion was Russian Orthodox Christianity, but the empire also included Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Buddhists. Well, the Russian Orthodox Christian were dominated, but it's not like they were the only resident of Russia. Although they were in majority, but the Russian Empire also included people of different religions like the Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Buddhists, etc. Beside the territory around Moscow, the Russian Empire included current days Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Russia of 1914 was not confined to today's Russia only. The Russia of 1914 also included the present day's Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. It also stretched to the Pacific and comprised today's Central Asian states as well as Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So that was the boundary, the physical limitation of Russian Empire. Now let's try to understand the economy and the society of Russian Empire during 1914. At the beginning of the 20th century, 85% Russians were agriculturalists. Well, when we discuss about the economy of any country which are present day called as developed country, in their past also the agricultural activities were dominated. Later, the industries grew, the service sector grew, and gradually they turned to developed countries. But in every country, mainly in developing country, the agricultural sector, which is also called primary sector, is the dominated sector. Likewise, in Russia during 1914, the maximum people, that is almost the 85% of Russian population, were engaged in agricultural sector, or they were agriculturalist. As the large section of the population were engaged in agricultural production, during those period the cultivators of Russia produced a very good amount of agricultural products, and they were not only self sufficient in agricultural products, but they were also a very good exporter of grain. As a large mass of population of Russia was indulged in agricultural activity, they produced so much that they were self-sufficient, as well as they were a major exporter of food grains all over the world during that period. Industries were very few. Maximum people were engaged in agricultural activity, and industries were very few in that time. And the prominent industrial areas of Russia during that time were St. Petersburg and Moscow. These were the few prominent area of Russia where most industries were set up. Otherwise, 85% of population were engaged in agricultural activities. The industrialization was just started. The industries were started coming into the society, but the industrialization was at its infancy stage. It was just started growing. Till that time, the majority of population were depending on agricultural activities only. Craftsmen undertook much of the production, but large factories existed alongside crafts workshops. Although the industries came up to the society, but maximum of the production work were dominated or undertaken by the craftsperson. The industries, they did not completely taken over the market. The industries, they coexisted alongside the crafts production, but yet the production was mostly done by the craftsmen and not completely by the industries. Many factories were set up in the Many factories were set up in the 1890s when Russia's railway network was extended and foreign investment in industries increased. Gradually, the factories grew rapidly towards the 1890s because of the expansion of railways. When the railways when the railways started coming up in Russian society, and because of rapid expansion of railways, it made the transportation of inputs and outputs easier. Also, it attracted many foreign investors to invest in Russia, and as a result of that, factories started growing in Russia. Coal production doubled and iron and steel output quad- coal production coal production doubled and iron and steel output quadrupled by the 1900s. In some areas, factory workers and craftsmen were almost equal in number. Now, there was a stage when the industries were very few and the production work were dominated by the craftsperson. Then there was a time when, because of development in railway and attraction of foreign investor, the factories started growing. And then there was a time when the factories were equal to the number of craftsmen. Means now the factory is making a space for itself. Now people of Russia gradually started accepting factory and factory products. Most industries most industries were the private property of industrialists, but the industries which were growing rapidly were mostly private property. It was not government's property. Government was not investing more in industries. Rather, many industries which were rapidly growing and set up in Russia were owned and operated by private individuals, private owners. Government supervised large factories to ensure minimum wages and limited hours of work. But factory inspector could not prevent rules being broken. As most of the factories were owned and operated privately, government timely supervised those industries in order to ensure minimum wages to its citizen and to limit the working hour, because we already discussed in last videos that because of a huge crisis in job creation, people were there desperately seeking for employment, but the employment creation was very slow, so people were ready to accept any kind of work. And because of huge supply of labor compared to their demand, the wage rate were very low and the working hours were very long, along with poor working environment or poor working condition. So during that period, the Russian government was supervising various industries in order to ensure the workers of the industry at least minimum wages and to limit the working hour, because factories were employing the workers as long hours as possible and paying them very low. So government was supervising to prevent the exploitation of workers, but the industrialists, they got their techniques to cheat the inspectors and to exploit the laborers. Although government made several rules to protect the workers' exploitation, but in many industries the rules were successfully broken by the industrialists. They got their way, their techniques to make the worker work for longer hour of time in a poor wage. In craft units and small workshops, the working day was sometimes 15 hours compared with 10 to 12 hours in factories. Well, everywhere, whether it's in craft industry or in machinery industries, the workers were suffering the most. In industries, in bigger factories where the workers were working for 10 to 12 hours, in small craft manufacturing workshops, the workers were working for 15 long hours. Accommodation varied from rooms to dormitories, and the living accommodations that were provided to the workers by their owners, whether in craft workshops or in industries, were various from the size of a room to dormitory. Room means where the worker provided a single room or a room that is shared by 1 to 2 to 3 members, whereas a dormitory means a large hall which is shared by as many people as possible. Workers were divided socially. How? Some workers came from villages and they wanted to go back to village and keep a link with their village, whereas some workers were from the whereas some workers were from urban area, or even though they came from a village, they gradually settled up in urban area. So the workers were divided among themselves as rural or urban resident. The workers were also divided by skill. Metal workers considered themselves aristocrat among other workers, as their occupation demanded more training and skill. It is not like that the workers during that time were divided only socially. Workers were also divided by their skill. The metal workers, they considered themselves as aristocrat, means more superior, more classy, as their work required more trained ability and more skill, more training, more fine and focus work. Also, the workers were divided on the basis of their gender. At that time, women constitute 31% of factories' labor force, but they were paid less compared to men. Although the work that was performed by the male labor and female labor were same, but the wage rate was different. The men were get paid more for the same work, whereas the female or the woman laborer got less for the same work. Although the work was same, the wage rate was different because of their gender. Next, the workers were also divided on the basis of their dress up and manners. Few belonged to the urban area, to the richer section, so their dressing sense, their manners, their mannerism was completely different from the people who came from village area, or who were a bit poorer, or who were working in small factories or small manufacturing sector or in small workshops. So during that time, the industrial labor were divided socially based on their skill, based on their training, based on their gender, based on their dressing sense and manners. So the workers, they were divided, they were different from everyone in different aspect. Some workers formed associations to help members in time of unemployment or financial hardship, but such associations were few. Many workers, they formed some associations in order to help the member of the association. When any member of any association remain unemployed or in a need of money, the other members of that association, they pulled some amount of resource together and helped the needy member. But such associations were very few. Despite of such divisions, that workers belong to different social group, different skill group, different technique group, different gender group, different dressing and manner group, different associations group, despite of all those differences existing between them, they all were getting united during the time of need. When any industry dismiss any worker, or make the working condition harsh or reduce their wage rate, all those workers came together to do strike, to fight for their right to work for less hour and get paid well. So although the workers were divided in several layers, their unity was never shaken during the time of need of any fellow member. Despite divisions, workers did unite to strike when they disagree with employers about dismissal or working conditions, as we discussed. These strikes took place frequently in the textile industry during 1896 to 1897, and in the metal industry during 1902. So the strikes by the industrial workers were very frequent in textile industries and metal industry. Okay? Now let's try to understand the social structure and the economical structure of the peasants. In the countrysides, in the rural areas, peasants cultivated most of the land, but the nobility, the crown, and the Orthodox Church owned large properties. Very similar to the situation of France. In Russia also, the peasant cultivated most of the land, but most of the cultivable land were the properties of the nobility, the crown, and the Orthodox Church. Means many peasants were landless agricultural laborers. They were contributing the labor, they were contributing to the agricultural sector, but they were landless. They were merely contributing as labor. They were not owning any property. Peasants too were divided, and like the industrial workers, peasants too were divided among themselves based on their property owning and also based on their religions. Few peasants were there who had their own agricultural land. Few peasants were there who had their small agricultural land, so they produce for themselves as well as working in others' field. And most peasants were there who do not have their own agricultural land. They were farmer, but they were farmer who contributes labor to the field of the nobility, the crown, the Orthodox Church, and the rich peasants. The peasants were also divided on the basis of religions, but except in few cases, they had no respect for the nobility. Well, although the peasants were divided on the basis of their possession and their religion, but they were united as no peasants was liking the nobility. Now, the question is, who were the nobility? Who were the nobles? The answer to that is nobles got their power and position through their services to the Tsar, not through local popularity. So, nobility or the nobles were those people whose forefathers were serving the Tsar, who belonged to the families who served the Tsars. So, the nobles got their position, their power by their service to the crown and not because of their local popularity. That means that they were not elected, they were not chosen by the people. The nobles were nobles by birth. They were nobles because of their service to the Tsar, and the people of the locality never elected them as nobles. Peasants wanted the land of the nobles to be given to them. Frequently, they refused to pay rent and even murdered landlords. The peasant, as they were contributing to the agricultural sector, they were really practicing the peasantry. They wanted the land to be transformed to them from the nobles because the nobles were not peasants. They were serving the Tsar, so they do not require much of land as the land was required by the peasants. So the peasant wanted the lands of the nobles to be transformed to them. And in protest, sometimes the peasants were also refusing to pay rent, or sometimes they also murdered the landlord in protest. So, in protest of the possession of land by the nobility, sometimes the peasants were also refused to pay rent and sometimes they also murdered the landlords. In 1902, this occurred on a large scale in South Russia, and in 1905, such incidents took place all over the Russia. By 1905, refusing to pay rent and murdering landlord became very common. The peasants of Russia, they pulled their land together periodically, and their commune means the mir, means the head of the peasants. He divided the collected land, the pooled land, according to the need of individual families or individual farmers or individual peasants. Well, that's all about this class. Thank you.